John DeDakis. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you, Rich?
I'm doing all right. I'm glad to be able to have this conversation with you finally. We've had it on the schedule for a little while.
A long time. Yeah.
Yes. So I'm glad to be able to finally sit down and have this conversation.
Same here.
Let me give the audience a brief introduction for you so that they get a bit of an overview of who you are and what you've done.
Okay.
You're a veteran CNN insider, former senior copy editor on the Emmy and Peabody Award-winning The Situation Room with Wolf Blitzer, where you spent 25 years shaping news coverage from starting as a writer and supervising shows like Daybreak. Former White House correspondent, served as White House correspondent for CBN News during the final years of Ronald Reagan's presidency, and also interviewed Reagan and Jimmy Carter. You're an award-winning thriller author, creator of the acclaimed Lark Chadwick mystery suspense series, which is 6 novels so far, and your latest, Enemies Domestic, winning the grand prize for the Chanticleer International Book Awards, drawing on your real-world journalism experience of dripping, timely political stories. You're also a writing coach and an educator, highly sought after for your writing coaching and your manuscript editor, and a workshop leader in major conferences like Sleuth Fest and Killer Nashville and literary centers. Also a former adjunct journalist, instructor, and host of the video podcast One-on-One with John DeDakis.
So far, so good.
Quite a career in journalism.
Well, I'm old.
Well, you don't look too old.
Well, thank you. I've got you fooled.
That's the beauty of perception, right? It's not always as exactly as it seems.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah. So I want to start off with my only scripted question that I have for any of these interviews, and it is, where were you born and what was life like as a kid for John?
Oh, great question. I was born in La Crosse, Wisconsin, which is right along the Mississippi River on Wisconsin's west coast, right at the little bend in the river there. And La Crosse was a great place to grow up. 40 or 50,000 people, a medium-sized town. So it was a city, but it wasn't so big that you were lost in the shuffle, and it wasn't so small that you were, just it was overbearing or boring or whatever.
Yeah.
My dad was a lawyer. My mom was an elementary school teacher. They loved each other. They were together 53 years. My dad was a World War II vet. And I grew up knowing I was loved. And I know that a lot of people don't have that experience. And it took me, I think, decades to realize just how blessed I was with the upbringing I had. And, I like to say I was born on second base at a time when a lot of people, didn't even have the right to suit up, much
Yeah.
less play the game.
How about grandparents? Did you know your grandparents as you were growing up?
Yeah, my I was closer to my mom's parents because they lived in La Crosse,
Okay.
where my mom grew up as well. My grandpa was born in East Bergen on the island of Reagan in Germany, and
Okay.
came over to the U.S. in 1900 when he was 21. And he and his dad built the house that my mom grew up in and that he lived and died in. And so I knew my maternal grandparents well. My grandmother had both her legs amputated over the years because of diabetes. And
Wow.
so she was in a wheelchair most of the time that I knew her. And let's see, my dad was born in Greece. And so he came over to the US when he was 6 and grew up in Chicago. And so I knew both of my grandparents. My dad's mom died when I was only 9, and neither of them really spoke English all that well. So the
Okay.
extent of my relationship with my grandfather was him, hitting me on the cheek and going, "You're a good boy, John. You're a good boy." That was about it.
Well, at least again, you were able to see that bit of love that was given
Yeah.
And also too, that not many get that touch, that connection
Yes.
touch. Um,
Yeah.
for you to
Yeah.
have that as well, that's very impressionable
Yeah.
for a child.
I think absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, the right kind of touch.
Yeah,
Because as we know, there's all kinds of touching that can go on, and not all of it's great.
for sure, for sure. How was elementary school for you, John? Were you one of those students that would sit in the back of the class and kind of just observe, or were you one that was closer to the front and wanted to engage?
Oh, I'd have to think about that. That was so long ago. I think I was kind of intimidated. I think I was a scaredy cat.
Okay.
And so I think that in fourth grade, that was a really good fit because Mrs. Anderson was my fourth grade teacher. And one of the things that she did, I think it was on Wednesdays, we could work at our own pace. There were several, things of homework that we had to do that we could do in class, and we could do it pretty much on our own as opposed to a regimented, oh, it's 10:04, we have to be doing this. I hated that.
Yeah.
And so I loved being able to work at my own pace, which looking back, it's probably entrepreneurial in a sense because that's my life right now.
Yeah.
But for so long in my career, it was pretty much dictated by externals. But yeah, and I was definitely self-conscious about my lack of understanding of mathematics. I mean,
Okay.
I can admit it now. I still count on my fingers sometimes.
Yeah.
I mean, fortunately, I learned the multiplication tables. Don't test me. And but math, oh, I felt so inferior to most of these kids that just really got it. In fact, and I'll say one more thing. This was a time when the country was going through a change where science and math were became very important because it was the space race, and we were in competition with the Russians to get to the moon, right?
Yeah.
And so that meant that, all of the education, the important stuff that they were teaching was math and science, which were my weaknesses. I mean, my strengths were verbal and
Yeah.
reading and social studies and that kind of stuff. And because I didn't test well, I was put in, they had a track system, track one, track two, and all of my friends were in track one. I was in track two, and sometimes, depending on the year, and even farther back track. And I think that kind of, I don't think they do that anymore, or at least they don't do it so that the kids are that conscious of it. But it was, I think that that kind of played into a sense of a feeling of inferiority at times.
Yeah, I get it. I was never great at math either. I got up to multiplication, and anything after that was just kind of like foreign language to me.
Yeah.
It didn't really make, and even at this point, I can multiply up to tens, 12s. Anything beyond that's a little bit, I got to get out a pencil and paper or calculator or something.
And I think foreign language is sort of related to math. I mean, my wife is really good in math and foreign languages.
Really?
Foreign language is a problem for me as well. At the University of Wisconsin, they had you had to take 16 credit hours of a foreign language, and I flunked French twice,
Oh, wow.
and oh my God, it was terrible. And I finally got my degree because I took Spanish, which was easier. And I was
Okay.
in the teaching assistant's office every day. She thought I had a crush on her. And and but I did what needed to be done. But man, that math and foreign languages, forget about it.
Yeah. Were you athletic at all as a kid?
I was skinny and scrawny, but that didn't mean that I didn't like athletics. My sister's boyfriend was, the all-around athlete,
Okay.
the high scorer in basketball. And I mean, his record was only recently broken after like 50 years.
Oh,
And
wow.
so I played basketball, not well, but we had a basketball. My dad put up a basketball hoop in the backyard, and the neighbors, we'd play basketball. played stickball, in the neighborhood, was in Little League, but I was just a scrawny little kid. I played third base my first season, and I didn't have an arm. I mean, my throw to first base was like a loop, whoa. And by that
Right.
time, they're rounding third.
Yeah.
But I did play tennis. I was pretty good at tennis,
Okay.
and I lettered in it in high school and played a lot. I used to play, and then when I was living in Atlanta, tennis is a big deal there. So I was on a tennis team in the neighborhood. But when my first novel came out, I started to cut back. Something had to give because I was
Right.
doing a lot more marketing, and so I wasn't playing tennis as much. And now, my feet are gone pretty much. I mean, fallen arches and all that kind of stuff. I mean, I don't
Yeah.
even think I could play pickleball now.
Yeah, I was a scrawny kid too, and lanky. Uh,
Yeah.
I was taller than most kids my age. And by the time I was 14, I hit a growth spurt and grew like 7 inches in one summer. So yeah, I get being the lanky kid. But for me, that was always a speed scenario. It allowed me to be pretty fast.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we all find our niche at some point.
Yeah, definitely. Moving into high school, did you have any more teachers like Mrs. Anderson where they kind of just let you do your thing?
There were some definite mentors that I had in high school. Jim Sauer was the English teacher, and and I think that the ones I tended to have an affinity for were younger. I think this was Mr. Sauer's first year teaching, and he thought I was a good writer, and he was really interested in jazz. He'd give a jazz
Yeah.
lecture every now and then, and of course I knew nothing about jazz, but Ringo Starr taught me how to play drums. He doesn't
Oh,
know it. He doesn't know it, but it's only been recently that I've been much more of a appreciating of jazz. And then George McClendon, Mr. McClendon was the speech teacher, and he cast me in Edward Albee's The Sandbox, which is a 15-minute one-act play, and we traveled around the state in competitions with other one-act plays,
oh
and we
wow.
and we won the state. We came in first in the state contest. So that was a really affirming teacher who recognized some of the gifts that I had and brought those out. So in those early high school years, I was very active in theater, both in high school and in community theater in La Crosse.
Okay. Did your love of writing come earlier on than high school, or was that where it kind of sparked?
Not really. I mean, I think I was always interested in words, and I was pretty good in as a speaker, I guess. But my parents had books, Book of the Month Club, and I can remember I still have some early books that I wrote. Typing paper, staple
Right.
it together.
Right.
My daughter, who's got a PhD in creative writing, came across one of my books and said, "Oh, Dad, this is terrible." So I had a desire to mimic what I was seeing, but I wasn't really identifying myself as a writer. I think, if anything, the career path that was more attractive to me was going into law and going into practice with my dad, and then eventually going into journalism instead. But I was always thinking in terms of a political career as well. So
Okay.
a lot of those early formative times were spent, I don't know, in relationships, in
Yeah.
speaking, and those kinds of skills that a politician needs.
Do you remember a certain point where that shy, introspective kid, as you described yourself earlier on in elementary school, shifted into that one who was more willing to step out, be in front of people?
Well, I think it really did happen when I was cast as Grandma in that play, The Sandbox, the Edward Albee play. That was when I found that I was doing something that I was good at, and it made a connection with other people. and it was humor. I mean, that was something that I was interested in. And I think I turned to humor primarily because I was picked on and bullied, by the hoods. And
Yeah.
so humor is a good way to defuse the situation.
Right.
And Bob Newhart was just getting his start back then. And
Okay.
my uncle Jess was a band leader in Houston, Texas. And Bob Newhart's first comedy album was taped at the club that my uncle used to play at in his orchette. And so
Oh, wow.
he got Bob Newhart's autograph for me and sent us a copy of The Button Down Mind of Bob Newhart, which is, his first comedy album. And I mean, I memorized it word for word and did it as in talent shows in junior high, which again was an out front. This is something that connects with other people. And so formatively, I was seeing some way of connecting that was fulfilling at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciated Bob Newhart. I'm old enough to remember him being on TV and everything, and I did enjoy him as a comedian and actor.
Yeah, very dry, very droll sense of humor.
Yeah, and I think that was the unique component that it it wasn't too abrasive. It was just kind of quick wit.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah,
Now I have every now and then I dip into comedy radio on Sirius XM, and it's troubling because it's like, it's like they think it's funny to drop the F bomb,
yeah,
just for the sake of dropping it.
right.
And and sometimes they can be very funny doing it, but you don't have to go there in order to be funny.
Yeah, exactly. As you're getting towards the end of high school and you're anticipating you're going to go off to college to study law, as you mentioned.
Well, I mean, first you got to get out of undergrad, but that
Right.
was, first things first.
What was that decision making process like for you of where am I going to go?
That was very difficult, partly because of the country at the time.
Okay.
I went to college in 1968. The Vietnam War
Yep.
was just chewing people up. I mean, we had 500,000 troops stationed in Vietnam, and 200 kids a week were being killed over there. Kids 18, 19, 20, my age.
Yeah.
And it was a very unpopular war, a lot of anti war activity on college campuses. When At the Kent State shootings, when 4 students were killed by National Guardsmen, college campuses all around the country exploded because all of these people, guys actually, were of draft age. And
Right.
so, they had a vested interest in opposing the war. And that was a very difficult time because I grew up with Nixon Republican parents.
Mm.
And, University of Wisconsin was very left wing. And so I'd argue the left wing line when I'd go home for Thanksgiving. I'd argue the right wing line during the dorm session, the bull sessions in the dorms. And when I was alone, I was confused. And so I volunteered at a campus radio station as a assistant news director, covered these anti-war riots, got tear gassed, and learned a lot about journalism. And that was really what helped get me into journalism just by doing it. Uh,
Okay.
but it was a very, very fraught time because my identity was just being, but it was a body blow to my identity. I mean,
Yeah.
I was coming across brilliant people and I just had this feeling I'm not that smart, which is one of the reasons I didn't go into law because I didn't think I was smart enough.
Wow. That's fascinating. Fascinating. Because the way that I see it, a lot of times people who don't always feel that they're smart or knowledgeable enough, if they've had any kind of dipping their toe into the acting stage world, they'll put that up in front of themselves to compensate for that internal dialogue of I'm not smart.
Yep.
But the very fact that they will step into that type of a position to do so lends to uh, an intellect that's very adaptable. So I find that fascinating when I hear stories that are like that.
I've never heard that said before, but I have to think about that because, that's a new way of looking at things that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. As you're getting into this environment of journalism and you're saying that you're arguing one side at a particular point in time and then another side at the other point in time, did you see the scenarios of where those would cross and come together in the middle, or did you see them always as two separate scenarios and have a feeling within yourself that I think I can bridge this gap potentially?
That's a very good question. I think that because I respected my parents so much, even when I disagreed with them,
Sure.
I think that's probably why journalism was such a good fit for me because I didn't have to make up my mind. I mean, good journalism is not the whole purpose of journalism is to inform, not
Right.
persuade. I mean,
Right.
you do have the op-ed page, but
Yep.
usually the people who are on the op-ed page were journalists, just the facts journalists before they earned the right to be heard. And
Yeah.
so being in the middle of, helping me help me understand, going to each side was really comfortable because I didn't have to make up my own mind. I had opinions, but
Yeah.
but I wasn't wedded to them. I was open to other ideas. And I think that was probably why I was in journalism for 45 years.
Yeah. That's fantastic. Wish we had a little bit more of that now.
Well, it's still there. You just have to be more discerning and look for it because the
Yeah.
internet and cell phones have made it a lot more difficult to find
Yeah.
reliable information and responsible journalism. It's still out there, and it's often and still being conducted by the same organizations that have always been there,
Yeah.
Associated Press, just to give you one example. But there are just so many other voices, including from the White House that we're not just in alternate facts world now.
Right.
We're in lies. We're in just plain deceit.
Yeah. When you stepped into that realm and you got the opportunity to start looking at that as the thing that you wanted to stay in and potentially build a career in, what was that first opportunity that allowed you to get a paycheck to where you were like, okay, I can do something I'm enjoying as well as getting paid to do it?
Again, it goes back to mentors.
Yeah.
When I was about 12, I think one of my buddies and I were riding our bikes in La Crosse, small town or small city, and we were passing the studios and transmitter of WLCX radio, AM 1490, the local rock and roll station.
Yeah.
And my buddy said, "Well, let's knock on the door and see if they'll show us around." And this was just a shack. And we did. And the guy who opened the door, Pete Lakin, was he was the jock on duty at the time, and he showed us around.
Yeah.
And I was smitten by this whole radio thing because he let us watch him, do the news and spin records and stuff like that. And I would go visit him on weekends. He'd let me hang out and just watch.
Oh,
And
cool.
and I learned a lot just by doing that. So the very first paying job that I got in journalism was I'm pretty sure it was at that station. Pete
Okay.
had already moved on, but yeah, I was a part-time disc jockey. I think I was also in the news department. And yeah, that was when it started to percolate that this is something I'm interested in and they'll pay me for it.
It also during that time, music is doing something that is very foundational in terms of where we are today. How
Oh,
did
yeah.
that Uh, how did that uh, affect you in terms of impression, having the opportunity to be that DJ?
You are hitting all the right buttons.
Well, thank you.
And it's interesting because my memoir is going to be coming out later this year, and these are all
Oh,
the things we're going to be,
fantastic.
hitting. So nicely done there, Rich.
Thank you.
And one of the things I was just thinking about today, or not just today, but this week, is that I came of age in 1964 when the Beatles
Yeah.
stormed onto the scene and changed everything. And I look back on that, and they hit the scene in the United States just a month or two after JFK was assassinated. And
Mhm.
those were the Beatles and JFK, those two phenomena, I guess is plural, were pivotal in many ways. And I look back now and I can see how formative those two events were in my life because I'm still wondering, was there a gunman on the grassy knoll? I don't know. You can make a case for and against it. And the Beatles are, their music is still, I mean, it's multi-generational. It's
Yeah.
cross-generational. I'm reading the book John and Paul right now. It's a love story about their friendship and their creative approach to music.
Yeah.
And I can see just how deeply embedded the those two events are in my life that they still have my attention and my imagination going this far removed from that. Back in the 60s, that's when the music was good, as far as I'm concerned.
Right. That's amazing. I was born at the tail end of the '60s, and for me, that music that carried over into the '70s and the '70s music has always been something that I can go back to and just instantly connect.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so it's definitely an impressionable era for sure.
Well, and because of the Vietnam War, a lot of that music fueled the anti-war movement.
Yeah.
You know, the Buffalo Springfield, something happening here, or Fortunate Son. These are, anti-war songs.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. At what point did you decide or move in the direction of giving up the DJ component to the journalistic opportunities and move more into just the research, the writing, the putting together of articles?
I think it was gradual because for a long time I was doing both. And even when I was in the Army, I was stationed at the American Forces Radio and Television Network in Frankfurt, Germany. And even though I was assigned to a special events radio unit where I was doing interviews, I still had to pull a board shift spinning records. So for a while, the two were in tandem. But it was and when I got out of the Army, I went back to the University of Wisconsin because I'd almost dropped out the first time. And that's when I got my degree in broadcast journalism. And that's when you got to start making money. And journalism was always fundamental. And so it was, I think, when I got out of the Army, I was 24, and that's when I really focused on journalism.
I don't know how I missed the Army component in your history.
Well, it got buried in there somewhere.
Did you enter the Army based off of the draft, or did you make the decision to step in?
Well, they had, I was in 1969, I was 19, and they had a draft. It was the first
Yeah.
draft, and it was a lottery system, and everyone was assigned a number based on their birth date.
Yeah.
They put all 366 counting leap year dates, birth dates in this drum, and then they picked them out one at a time. And so my birth date was picked out the 14th time. So my draft number was 14. And anybody with a number below 150 was going to get drafted. The good
Gotcha.
the good news is I had a draft deferment because I was a student. I had a
Oh,
student. determined. But the war kept droning on, and it came when I transferred from one school to the other. I lost 20 credits in the transfer because I was such a lousy student that I lost 20 credits. And now I'm ready to get drafted. And so
Yeah.
my dad was on the draft board, and I went to my dad.
Uh,
Yeah, don't get ahead of the story. I went to my dad and I said, "Hey, Dad," and he knew what I was going to ask. And so before I could even finish asking the question, he said, he was sitting. This is his desk. I was sitting. He was sitting right here where I'm sitting now, and he said to me, "Hell no, I'm not going to get you out of this. And talk to a recruiter and find out what your options are, because not everybody that's in the service is on the front lines killing people." And so
right.
I talked to a recruiter and discovered they had military journalism. And so
Okay.
I enlisted to avoid the draft. And they, I went to journalism, the Defense Information School
Yeah.
at the time it was in Indianapolis. Everybody who's a graduate, it's everything in the Army is has it's DINFOS, Defense Information School. So we're all DINFOS trained killers. And so that's what I ended up going into. But I did get orders to Vietnam, but they were changed at the last minute to Germany, and that's I ended up not having to go to Vietnam.
Wow. That's very fascinating. So you didn't have to do any combat,
No combat, nope.
no combat.
Unless the Russians had decided to invade, coming down the Fulda Gap in East Germany, you know,
Right.
then it would have been a shooting war, and all bets are off. East, being in Central Europe was great. And the first interview I did for this radio unit was with Alfred Hitchcock. So,
Oh,
I mean,
wow.
that's what I said. I mean, that was a moment, and that really crystallized. This is what I'm good at. This is what I love. This is what I'm gonna do.
How did that even come about at that particular point in time?
Because Hitchcock was promoting Frenzy, which was his penultimate movie,
Okay.
and the American Forces Network. There are 250,000 troops stationed over there, so
Yeah.
if you want to get the word out, you want to do an interview with AFN, and so and my boss could have done the interview in his sleep, but he had a mentor's heart and assigned me to do it instead.
Wow. Wow. It's fascinating for me when I hear stories of people's life journeys, which is basically the true format of the podcast. And so, how many times specific individuals showing that compassion, interest, that foresight into an individual's abilities changes so much of their life and moves them in directions that they excel in.
It really is uncanny, and it doesn't cost them anything. And yet, I've had writing students who've told me, let's say they're in their 40s or 50s, they've said, I had an English teacher in high school who said, "Don't go into writing." And
Right.
it just broke their spirit, and yet they had the desire.
Yeah.
And instead help these people get better. If they've got the desire, mold it into something that that they can use, because that if you've got the desire, man, that's half the battle.
Yeah. And those naysayers that come along the line as well. I had one in college in my basic drawing class. And those were the only classes that I was passing, was my art classes. I wasn't passing anything else.
Yeah.
But he said, he told my parents even because they had come for a visit. And he told them he'll never be more than a B student. And I heard that from them, and I was just like, I was crushed, but also I was pissed because I was like, then why am I even spending money here? If that's the case, right? If it's already determined you're only going to be a B student, why should I even continue on? And
Yeah.
ultimately, I didn't continue just because I was having to work and also pay for most of it myself. Um, and having to retake classes. I just couldn't afford to retake classes. I dropped out and just dove right into an artistic career. And from that moment on, I've never let anybody tell me I couldn't do something.
Good for you. Yeah. Because it's so demoralizing otherwise.
Yeah. I've just done it. And it's all just from sheer confidence in the fact that I can draw what I want to create. So if I can do that, I know it can be done.
Exactly. I mean, my mom knew what my IQ was, and she never told me. She said, "Yeah." I mean, and I said, "Why don't you tell me, Mom?" She said, "Because if it's low, you won't try, and if it's high, you won't try."
Very
So
strategic.
all she said is, "You're above average," which
Okay.
that was safe.
Coming back after your stint in the military and realizing, yeah, this is what I'm going to do. What was that first opportunity that settled you into that world?
Again, we're talking mentors. My journalism professor, Jim Hoyt, another relatively young guy at the time, he'd worked at NBC, decided to go into academia. In fact, he was on the desk at NBC in Washington the night of the Watergate break-in.
Oh, wow.
And the crew called in from court and said, we've got these guys that have been busted breaking into the Democratic National Headquarters. They seem to have White House connections. What should we do? And Jim, goes, I don't know. So Jim goes to the NBC's Justice Department correspondent, Carl Stern, and told him that. And Carl says, well, let me make a couple of calls. So Carl Stern makes a few calls, comes back to Hoyt and said, I just talked to John Mitchell, the Attorney General. He said it's no big deal. John Mitchell went to prison for obstruction of justice.
Holy crap.
So that means, you can be well connected and have great sources, but if they're lying to you, they're not much good.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
so my point here is not, I mean, Hoyt's story is a great one, but the impact he had on me is that I was working part-time at a local radio station in Madison, Wisconsin. But remember, I'd almost flunked out of school before the Army,
Yeah.
and it was starting to eat up a lot of time, and I knew I needed to get this degree. So I told Jim, I said, I'm going to quit the job. And he says, don't do that because you've got a foot in the door and you need, and I said, no, I'm going to quit. And I did. And I quit. And then he came to me, maybe a month or so later, and he said, I've got this, there's an opportunity at a local television station, the NBC affiliate, just rewriting wire copy for 12 hours a week on weekends. And I
Okay.
said, yeah, they say 12 hours, but, and he said, well, just talk to the news director. It can't hurt. So I
Right.
did, got the job. It was 12 hours a week. They stuck to it, but
Wow.
but you see, Jim was well connected with all the news directors in town.
Yeah.
And basically he greased the skids. In fact, the way I got the job, I was interviewing with the news director, and for the longest time, he's telling me about the station and about how the job goes and all that. And I mean, we're sitting there for half an hour, and I said, "Do I have the job?" And he goes, "Oh, hell yeah." Because apparently Jim talked me up, and I had I already had a background
Yeah.
in the military, so that was the first real TV job that I had, and I was there 8 years.
Wow. Yeah. 12 hours to 8 years.
Yeah, it was a good gig. It was a good gig.
It did expand on you.
Yeah, it did. It did. It did. It did. And when I graduated, they made me full time, but they didn't have a full time reporter position. So for 3 days a week, I was a photographer, and 2 days a week on the weekend, I was a reporter. But
Okay.
a reporter on the weekend, that's like the picnic patrol. You're going to this picnic and that
Right.
picnic and that fundraiser,
Yeah.
and but the photog duties were kind of fun. And this is still in the days of film, you
Right.
know. And of course, the chief photographer was a little disdainful. He called me, he said I was part of the Instamatic School of Journalism, of photography.
Jeez.
I know
Oh,
it's a
geez.
rough job. It's a rough world out there.
How did that form of creativity of capturing images, how did that affect you as well?
Ooh, well, and coming from an artist, that's an important question to ask. I
Yeah.
have to say, though, that this photographer was an excellent photographer, and I learned a lot about framing
Okay.
uh, and being able to use sort of the depth of field and being able to frame it so that there's something in the foreground, but you're still focused out there. And so there's a lot going on, and you don't have to move around and zoom and all that kind of stuff. If you frame it just right, you've got, you can tell a story
Yeah.
visually. And
Yeah.
so I really did like that a lot. And I made a lot of mistakes too, but I enjoyed that a lot, and I still have, and with the iPhone, I mean, the camera for an iPhone, it's air quality, that's as good as any camera, any professional camera, and so I still like to take pictures and post them, that capture, catch my eye.
Yeah. That's great. The interesting component that I'm finding with your story so far is these branches of creative that come into play with the journalism aspect.
Right.
Um, and I would imagine those are also spurring that creative thought process early on of storytelling. Is that correct?
Not on a conscious level.
Okay, fair enough.
The storytelling part really goes deeper than that.
Okay,
And it's something that I've been learning as I go, because as you know, I mean, I wasn't really thinking in terms of creating stories.
right, right.
Any of the stories I was telling were factual. It was just the fact,
Yeah,
where you can't make it up. Now, a lot of people would say you worked at CNN, so you were making it up all the time.
right.
No, I wasn't. But it wasn't until I started writing fiction that I began to realize the importance of storytelling, story creation. And the surprising thing I discovered is that a lot of the story creation comes from within, comes from that reservoir of creativity that is comprised of the experiences that you've had, the people that you've talked to, the books you've read, the movies you've seen. Um, all that's in there. And it's the way I describe it to my students is that writing is like dipping a straw into your subconscious. And when you start asking questions like, what if this happened? Or what if this person was like that? When you're asking those questions, it stirs things up. And the act of writing is like sipping from your subconscious, and it comes through the fingers and onto the page. It's spooky.
Yeah, yeah, definitely, definitely. With that in mind, then being just subconscious, and you're forging forward with the journalistic portion of it, and just grabbing facts, but also too something that's coming into play is more opportunities to speak to individuals who were very, very well known. As we mentioned in your intro, two presidents.
Right.
When you got those opportunities, what was that internal emotion or
Fear.
spark? Fear? Okay.
Oh yeah.
So all the way back to childhood being
Yeah. Oh yeah. Well, come on. Fear is not just a childish thing. That is with you throughout life. I mean, I think
okay,
that we wrestle with that all the
sure.
time. And in journalism, fear is, a major component. Fear of not getting the story, fear of missing your deadline. And I think the first time I met Reagan, he was running for president in 76, I think it was. He was running
Yeah,
against Gerald Ford. And uh, and he was visiting. He had a campaign stop in Wisconsin and in Janesville, which is not far from Madison. So I picked up a tape recorder and headed there. And I fell into step with him. I got past the Secret Service, and so and I had one question because there was something in the news that somebody said about him, and he knew the question was coming. So before I even finished asking it, he started to answer. And it was about a 40-second answer, and we walked, and the Secret Service got between us, but Reagan stopped, and I held my mic out, and he finished his answer.
Yeah.
So that was my first time meeting him. But it wasn't so much fear that this is Ronald Reagan, so much as it was fear that, I want to get the story. And did it make it to the tape? Is it okay?
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of that. I don't know. Where do you want to
Were,
go with this?
w- was there any interest there in terms of that connecting with him? Because he was an actor before he stepped into the political realm. With you being on the stage, did you see any opportunity to be able to connect in a different way?
One of the things I noticed is that he really made eye contact. I mean, I felt seen
Yeah.
because he was an actor. I mean, but now we know a lot more about him, and he was genuinely interested in other people.
Right.
Regardless of what you think about his politics or whatever, he was a connector,
Yeah.
and he was affable, and he understood the ceremonial parts of being president. It's morning in America. I mean, he made people feel good about the country and about themselves. And even in that brief 40 seconds, we connected.
Nice.
Yeah.
Very cool. Very cool. And how was the contrast with him to Jimmy Carter?
Carter was a bit more aloof,
Yeah.
really smart, but he was
Okay.
he was a scientist, and so very left-brained, not warm and fuzzy necessarily. So he was in his head a lot.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
not that I didn't feel a connection with him, but they were different, just temperamentally.
For sure. For sure. Once you get those opportunities and your career's going on, and you're stepping into this position working with Wolf Blitzer in the Situation Room, once you're into that environment of the journalistic career, how does that feel? How does that give you a sense of comfort and stability within that environment? Also, too, it being one of the louder voices of that time period, I would say, in terms of a go-to person to hear some things that may be different or maybe what you're really looking for.
Not sure what you're asking.
So where I'm trying to understand is being in that type of position, somebody who has that command of the airwaves. How does that support feel in terms of a level of comfort for you internally? Because 25 years, that's stability.
Well, I mean, the last stop in my journalism career was working with Wolf for the last 7 years. I retired from CNN in 2013 after 25 years at the network. And boy, comfort is not the word I would use. I
Okay.
mean, I mean, there's a certain degree of there's a rhythm, to what you're
Yeah.
doing, but
Yeah.
you're a cog in the machine by this time.
Yes.
As an editor, that's fault finding. It's not particularly creative, but it pays well.
Yeah.
And so the comfort isn't, that's not the word I would use because you're always afraid that something's going to get through that shouldn't get on the air.
Okay.
You're afraid that you're not going to get the script done in time. And so comfort is not, I mean, I felt confident in knowing what I know, knowing how to write, knowing how to guide writers. Of course, the writers I worked with were amazing. So, it's just a matter of just making sure that everything was nice and tidy. Uh,
Right.
but I can't say comfort is the word.
Okay. That's fair. That's definitely fair. I don't know that news is really ever comforting, honestly. So I get it. I get
Okay.
it. I'm trying to track that little child
Ah,
from early on
He's
who is
still there, man.
very shy.
Yeah. Shy, shy is the I describe myself as a shy extrovert
Okay,
with introvert tendencies.
got you.
And at the shy and introvert are not the same thing.
Right.
Um, Shy is there's a fear component there. And
Yeah.
so there was a lot of scaredy cat in me for the longest time. I don't feel that that's been a problem for me in the last, I don't know, 15 years or so. Much
Okay.
fear has been less and shyness have been less of an issue. But introversion, I don't know. I'm a ambivert. I'm
Yeah.
I get energy from other people, but there comes a point where it's draining and I need to recharge. COVID was fine. I hate to say it, it was fine because I'm good for long periods of time in my little grotto here. You know,
Yeah.
my wife is an introvert, so she doesn't
Okay.
need me to be around her all the time either. And I
Right.
didn't realize she was an introvert until COVID when she actually said it in so many words. And I go, well, you talk to me. She go, well, yeah, but you're you, you know. Uh,
Right.
and so I learned a lot just how I need people at times, and sometimes I need to be alone, and I'm comfortable in both those realms. I think it's the best way to be.
Yes. I can I can relate to that. Um, I'm very much one who would rather sit back and watch and listen,
Yeah.
than have to be the one who's up front and have all the eyes and attention on.
So that means it must have been difficult even to start a podcast.
Oh, I would have bet all kinds of money against it a year ago.
Really?
Yeah.
So why do it?
It only came about from my perspective on the necessity to try and tell story and tell my story and my journey through the creative field and fields, but also along that way, struggling with mental health issues.
Hmm.
So I felt that was going to be the most easiest way to get people to hear me and connect with me rather than me speaking to them directly.
Excellent, because you're asking questions, which means the spotlight's not on you, and yet in you're connecting at the same time,
Yeah.
and you're learning because you're listening.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So it came about as a necessity of trying to just raise the volume on the mental health element within the creative community. I mean,
Well,
it's not loud enough in general,
oh man.
and it's even
I'm
lower volume in the creative community.
But the interesting thing is the way you're conducting this, it's not feeling mental healthy. It's feeling just like a conversation. And yet you are asking all of the important questions about what makes us us.
Thank you for that perception, Jan. That's truly appreciated,
Sure.
especially from somebody who's been in the career that you've been in and have looked at everything and have picked out the things that were what you needed to convey with news. And that takes a lot of perceptive talent, takes a lot of perceptive concentration and observation.
Yeah.
So that's appreciated very much so.
Good. Thank you.
At what point in your career did you start thinking about writing as something to do for your enjoyment rather than for the public in terms of information wise that they would get?
I think it was when I was taking an American history class at at the University of Wisconsin.
Okay.
And we were at the time studying the Dust Bowl of the 1930s.
Yeah.
And one of the assigned books was The Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck,
Yeah.
which, now would be considered historical fiction, but it was written in the 30s and it made history come alive. And so that was a moment where reading not so much writing, but reading fiction got my attention. Because up until that point, any of the fiction that I'd read went over my head, wasn't really interesting, was more interested in nonfiction,
Okay.
biographies and politics and stuff.
Yeah.
But the we're talking an evolutionary process. And when they made me an editor at CNN, it wasn't creative and I needed a creative outlet. And so I first started writing a biography of a friend of mine who'd been murdered. And this would have been in the 90s when I started doing the research.
Oh, wow.
But it was time consuming, it was expensive. I was digging up information about him that his family didn't even know, but it was nonfiction. And so I hit the wall with it. And my wife suggested, well, why don't you write fiction instead and take some of this and pour it into the fiction.
Wow.
And so I did that, and then writing fiction became fun. I mean, I certainly wanted to get published, but the process was fun.
Yeah.
I mean, it took 10 years to get the agent that I've got, but I was getting better and I was learning about the process. So the writing for myself, you can't really uncouple it with the desire to share that with a wider audience.
Very interesting. Interesting as well that you wanted to learn more about your friend
Yeah.
uh, who was murdered,
Yeah.
and that was your pivot point, and the observation of your wife as well,
Yeah.
saying, I can, as an observer, I'm sure she's seeing how much it's a drain to you.
Oh, yeah. Oh, well, it was, come on, the kids were little. Had the burden of all of this. I mean, it's amazing she's still with me after almost 48 years, which is something I go through this is what I discuss in my memoir as well, because, some of my early beta readers say, she's wonderful. You're a jerk.
Oh, I think that's a lot of times that seems to be the whole scenario. Anyways, it's just a unmentioned situation.
Oh, yeah. Oh,
But
yeah.
we always have those counterparts that are the opposite of what we are.
Yeah.
But I haven't found you to be jerky-ish
No,
in this conversation at all.
it's early. It's early. I'd like to think I've learned a few things over the years. I'm a much different person than I was, when I was 19, 20, 21.
Yeah, I can imagine just the experiences at that age
Yeah.
within the story so far, how that can have all kinds of effects on how a person responds.
Right.
So,
And I've heard somebody say, well, it's not reasonable to believe that people can change. I disagree. I think we
right.
definitely have the capacity to change
Yeah,
and
I think
improve.
absolutely. I agree 100%. And also, too, offer the opportunity to see themselves
Yeah.
in a different light,
Yeah.
right? A
Yeah.
lot of times that's just the thing that they need.
Well, I journal. I journal every day.
Okay.
It's a life observed. The approach that I take is I look at the events of the day before. I keep a notebook of the time and what I was doing, and some entries, it takes me 2 hours to do whatever it is I'm doing. And then the next morning I can look back and actually see how I lived that day.
Right.
And so there's usually something worth a mention that goes into a little more detail about what effect this had on me or why I thought that way or felt that way. And yeah, I think there's a lot to be said for taking a close, critical, objective is hard, I think, to do about yourself, but to take as critical and a constructively critical look at yourself and how it's going.
How do you find the process of physically writing these notes and thoughts down versus now in 2026, you have the easiest component of just recording it audio wise? Do you find it to be a part of the process that is necessary for you to work through those thoughts?
I do. I never really thought about doing an audio journal. I
Okay.
find that writing slows you down. You can
Yeah.
only, you can, when you can talk, you can go fast. But when you're writing, it can only come out so, it's got to still come through that little point.
Yeah.
And that means you have to be a much more deliberate about what it is you're trying to say. So I find that the act of actually writing it in longhand is therapeutic. And who knows, maybe the Smithsonian will be interested someday.
Yeah, for sure.
No, not for sure.
You never know.
You never know.
Never know, John. Never know. I mean, who would have thought you might be interviewing Alfred Hitchcock?
True. Yeah. And I was
Being in
only
the military.
23 then.
I'm sure stranger things have happened throughout your life.
Yes. Pretty boring things too.
The that same process, do you take that into the writing of your novels and stories that you create, or do you type most of it?
The actual novels I type.
Okay.
But often, I mean, I don't call my journal a journal. I call it a writing notebook because that was where I was starting to experiment with ideas and things like that. It's less a writing notebook now and more of a journal, but often the very first nuggets of an idea will happen during a writing session that way. But the actual creation of the novel is done on the computer, and I don't usually print out pages and edit that way because I don't like to kill trees. But
Right.
but different process.
Yeah, absolutely. And also too, from that perspective, and the reason I'm asking it is because there's lots of studies that have been done in terms of what art or journaling or writing, physically writing, does for the brain in
Huh.
terms of switching switching to a different channel, so to speak. And that's why I was curious if that is something that you continuously do or
Yeah.
just for specific things.
Yeah. I mean, I've never really analyzed it. And I mean, I mean, you're an artist, so that's
Yeah.
very right brain. Do you write as well?
I do write, always jotting down notes. I've got sticky notepads all over the place. So I'm always trying to capture something because usually I find that if I have an idea and I think it's something that's pertinent to any of the things that I'm doing, and I don't write it down, I usually end up forgetting it and I'll lose it
Yeah.
completely.
Well, and
Um,
it's interesting. It's the opposite with me because I used to write ideas down and I'd put in all capital letters idea and put a box around it. And then I'd do that. And I would go back and I'd look at what I'd written and I'd forgotten what it meant. It was like, what does this mean? It was
yeah,
the ideas that really embedded themselves, took root inside me that I didn't write down, but this just kept me thinking. Those were the ones worth pursuing.
yeah. Lark Chadwick.
My alter ego.
Okay, that's where I was going. Where did he come from and where did he rise in the storyline of your life?
Now you're going to get mental healthy on me because Lark is a 20-something young woman
Oh, wow.
and I am neither. So where did Lark come from, you ask?
Yes.
How much time do we have?
It's as
Um,
much time as you're willing to
well, look, I didn't start writing a female character in any kind of calculated way. When I was starting to learn fiction, someone suggested that I should write in a way that stretches who I am. Never been a
Okay.
woman, at least in this life, so I gave it a try. And one of the things I discovered is that emotions are not gender specific. We all have the
Right.
exact same emotions. And I
Yeah.
found that I was able to capture those emotions because they're not female emotions. It's just that in my life, it's the women in my life who are more willing to share their emotions and they're more articulate about the emotions they're sharing.
Yeah.
Plus, I was working at CNN, surrounded by young women in their early to mid 20s who would let me ask them questions about what it's like to be a woman. and they tell me about their boyfriends and their careers and their families and, that kind of stuff. And so,
Yeah.
you learn that there's just a different way of looking at things. And then many of these women became beta readers and read early drafts of the first novel and subsequent novels. And that kind of feedback just helped me capture a female voice.
That's very fascinating. It's fascinating from the perspective of you have 48 years with your wife as well. So that says something about a potential communication capacity within that relationship.
Yeah.
Also, too, I think this is very, very important for men who may be listening to this episode because so many times we disregard the viewpoint of women
Oh my
and
God.
we disregard what they have to say, what they can bring to the table, their perspective, their insight, their intuition, all of these things, because we're men. We think we need to, be the big, tough, strong thing that moves throughout the world. But it doesn't allow us a lot of times to connect with those emotions
Yeah.
because they get tamped down.
Oh man.
And so much of that creates mental issues,
Yep.
mental struggles. And just the simple fact of you, even back in your career as a journalist, listening to that female perspective and having the insight to say, I need that in order to continue on or to, do what I'm doing. I think that's very, very much a highlightable aspect here for the audience that we need to consider that much more.
Oh, you are so right. I mean, this is my sweet spot. I feel very strongly about everything that you've said. I mean, in the stories I heard from my female friends, I mean, they would talk about being in a meeting and they would make a suggestion, complete silence. Two people later, a guy would say almost word for word the same thing. Everybody's going, great idea.
Yeah.
I mean, look, it just happened. We're taping this mid-February of 2026. Just about a week ago, Caitlin Collins, CNN's chief White House correspondent, is asking Donald Trump in the Oval Office about the Epstein files, about pedophilia, about powerful men using women for their own selfish ends.
Yeah.
And instead of answering the question, he says, "You don't smile enough."
Right. Deflect.
Talk about he's your nightmare boyfriend. And she's such a pro. She didn't take the bait. There's a camera on her.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you see how she's reacting. She's not reacting. She's doing her job. And all she does is she said, I'm asking about the reaction of the victims to the latest release of the files. She's
Right.
not taking the bait.
Yeah.
He's trying to deflect and demoralize and put her down. She's not having anything to do with that. And I've had guys say, Caitlin Collins, she's a terrible reporter. No, she's not. She's really good because her job is to hold powerful people accountable because we pay their salaries. Don't get me started, man.
No, no, no. I want to sit here for a little while, John, because I think this is a perspective that needs to be voiced a little more in terms of the relationship of hearing and listening between men and women. I think it's very much something that needs to be more common than uncommon.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I feel very strongly about this. And I've learned a lot just in writing Lark, creating Lark,
Yeah.
putting her in a lot of these situations. I mean, I teach a whole class on, writing in another voice.
Okay.
And, so this is a sweet spot, an important area to get into. I mean, we haven't really gotten into this, although we could if you want. I mean, one of the things I'm doing now is I'm helping people who are struggling with grief to use writing as a way to heal.
Oh
And
yeah.
you talk about men, and I mean, I've been on a couple of podcasts, and in some cases, we were talking about grief. And one of the guys who was interviewing me said, I have yet to have another guy on this podcast to talk about these things. You know, you're one
Yeah,
of the first guys who's actually come on.
for sure.
And yet, when you think about it, just about every mass shooter is a guy.
Yeah.
And I mean, my hunch is that these are guys who have deep pain, loss, anger, abuse, grief that they have bottled up. And
Right.
it doesn't make it go away. It becomes corrosive. And
Right.
in extreme examples, the tears become bullets.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Yeah, it creates so much harm that it is expressed in the most destructive way.
Yeah.
And it's sad, it's disappointing, it's horrible, completely horrible.
Do you have hope? Do you, you know, you've thought a lot about this. Are you in any way hopeful that we're turning a corner?
I'm hopeful that having conversations like this, where it actually starts to get talked about, that when it comes up, it catches somebody's ear. Because most of the times it's not something that's even out there in conversation.
Let me turn the tables.
Okay.
Um, at what point did you become passionate about this particular issue?
I think I've always had it even as a kid. I've always been able to communicate with females easier than with male.
Why do you suppose that is?
I think a lot of it has to do with my own empathy, my own understanding of things and perceiving things that sometimes a lot of people don't
Where
experience.
does where does the empathy come from?
Just my soul.
Okay,
My
not life experiences.
I'm sure it's been affected by life experiences, but I mean, I remember, just to give you an example of an empathetic reaction. My mom took me to see the movie Benji as a kid. And the only scene that I remember from that movie is when the male figure kicks Benji in the kitchen and that dog yelps. And as soon as that dog yelped and I saw that kick, I immediately started bawling. And I don't know, 5, 6 years old, maybe 4. I don't even remember what year that came out. But I've always had that response, that feeling of other people's pain.
Yeah, because empathy and sympathy are two different things. Sympathy
Oh,
is that,
sure.
you know, I understand your pain. Empathy is I feel it.
Yes. Yeah, and I've always felt it. So I've always had, and I can feel it in men just as easily as I can feel it in women as well.
And the interesting thing is that this empathy, of course, empathy is now considered a dirty word, but the interesting thing about empathy is that there's a certain degree of vulnerability that's involved.
Yep.
And I can understand what you're saying because women really resonate. That resonates with women.
Yeah.
Um, and yet that's counterintuitive. The tough guy, can't show any weakness, but who are they fooling, right?
Exactly. Exactly. That's it, you can't go through life always trying to be that tough guy because at some point in time, you're going to crack. And it may be at the most inopportune time that takes place.
Here's something else that I want to try out on you to see
Okay.
if we're on the same page.
Yes.
Um, man, this goes back 20 years ago that I started to be thinking about this. And that is, this whole thing about attraction and about
Okay.
male-female relationships. And
Yeah.
one of the things that I've discovered is that, you know, women, especially attractive women, seem to fall for the bad boys. And it's like, well, wait a minute, I'm a nice guy. And there was a woman I worked with at CNN. She was going through a divorce, very attractive young woman, and we had a good friendship. And at one point, she said, in just sort of she said it in sort of a wistful way. She said, "I just always seem to fall for the bad boys." And I remember asking her, I said, "Why is that?" And she started, and nobody had ever asked her that. And
Wow.
she started to, and she gave a thoughtful answer that on the surface sounds conceited, but it's really not. She said, "They're the only ones who have the confidence to approach me."
Yeah. Yeah.
And the interesting thing about attraction is that women aren't attracted to the guys with, the big paycheck and, the high powered job and, the muscles and all that. Sure, that can be a factor, but not
Yeah.
necessarily in the long run.
Right.
The real connection is on a deeper level. And the interesting thing is that on one level, a woman appreciates the confidence that someone has,
Yeah.
but there's a difference between confident and being arrogant, and that the bad boys have a mean streak.
Yeah.
But what ends up happening a lot of the time, whether you're a bad boy or whether you have empathy, is that if someone who is way out of your league gets interested in you, what ends up happening that can sabotage the relationship is neediness, which is different than vulnerability and empathy.
For sure.
Okay, is this making any sense?
Absolutely. Making all kinds of signs. And I think a key component of what you're saying here too is the fact that if more men, guys, young men even, if they can grasp the fact that through conversation, there becomes a level of confidence that will eventually just kick in.
What do you mean?
Through conversation with a female, at a certain point, just to start it off, that's disturbing in and of itself in terms of trying to be confident enough to say, "Hey, how are you?" Right?
Right.
Okay.
Exactly.
That's the starter, right?
That was terrible back in the day.
Exactly. And that's the scary part. The more that you're communicating and having conversation, being inquisitive, and also being willing to listen, that's another key component. And that back and forth, after a certain amount of time of doing so, there starts to be a little bit of a comfort that sets in,
Right.
which allows that confidence to slip in a little bit as well, in the fact that, oh, I'm having these conversations and I'm confident enough to be able to express something and hopefully get some kind of feedback.
Right. And I think coupled with confidence is security, a sense of
Yeah.
inner strength. There was a woman who took one of my writing classes, and I was talking to her, and she was writing a book on 100 first dates or something like that. And I remember asking her, "Is there a pattern here?" And she said, "Men do not know how to have a conversation with a woman
Right.
because it's all about them, and I'm just the audience."
Yeah.
And then there's the guy who's Marcelo. I forget his last name. He's on Saturday Night Live. He's the Domingo guy,
Oh,
and he's got a stand-up program on Netflix. And I wish I could remember the exact words of this particular bit that he does, but he's talking about male-female relationships, and one
yeah.
guy's going, "What does this guy have that I don't have?" And he goes, "Follow-up questions."
Exactly. That becomes a whole scenario of not listening.
Yeah, it goes back to what you said earlier about women feeling invisible, in a meeting or wherever. And that's the thing. Women are fascinating because I mean, my wife, 48 years, she's never been boring. Never.
Yeah.
I don't think she can say the same thing about me, but she's a smart person, and it works because she's found her voice,
Yes.
and it doesn't always agree with what I feel. And
Mhm.
so there's a lot of, back and forth, but that's fine because who wants somebody, who's just going to do whatever you want? That's boring.
Right.
It's
And
boring.
I think that says so much to the years together as well. 48, that's a long time. That's
Well,
a lot of time to get to know each other.
it
Each
is. And let's be honest, the bloom is off the rose in many ways. You know what I
for sure.
mean?
Yeah.
Love isn't a feeling, it's a choice.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing I've discovered is that when you keep making that choice, that reaffirmation,
Yeah.
there are warm fuzzies that are still a byproduct of that.
Exactly. I mean, that's powerful information right there, John. Just for men in general, in terms of relationship or looking at relationship, you're right. It does wear off after a while, and you have to still stay in that choice to make it work, to
Right.
keep moving along together, side
Right.
by side,
Yep.
leading when you need to, stepping back when you need to, allowing her to have some light shown on her, um,
Absolutely.
all of those things. And I think that's where part of our societal norms have been distorted,
Yeah.
because it's always been a higher, lower.
Patriarchy, been a patriarchy. Everybody has their assigned role. My
Yeah,
God, how that's authoritarianism.
it's just non long term functional.
you know. I mean,
It
it can be because
can
I'm sure that, anybody can cite chapter and verse on relationships where the guy is the man's man and the woman is fine with that. And that relationship really works.
right.
I mean,
Yep.
that is certainly a model if both people are comfortable with the roles that they're
Correct.
playing.
Correct. Yes. If they're both comfortable with that, then
Right.
all the power to them.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Um, so with Lark Chadwick,
Oh, her.
what have you learned in writing from her perspective and creating her stories? And how has that allowed you to maybe shift your way of thinking?
I've learned that men and women go through life looking at it differently. And I learned that when I was creating Lark. And I asked, there was one of the anchors I worked with. She was gorgeous. And I remember asking her, what's it like for guys to come on to you all the time? And she said, I can tell in the first 20 seconds if I'm safe. I never have to worry about being safe in a
Right, right.
conversation with a woman. And that's when I realized one little nugget: being a woman means playing defense. And so that was one of the things I learned. And so over time, I just I gravitate toward women because they are so often overlooked. And so I really want to get to know them better. I want to understand them. And I appreciate them so much because there's so much there. And so I guess that's what I've learned. I've learned to just shut up. Obviously, I'm not doing that here, but I much more prefer, I mean, Cindy gets really she's defending the women in my life because I'm relentless in my questions. And she said,
Okay.
don't ask that. That makes them uncomfortable. And so, based on what Cindy's advice is, I usually go deep in a conversation, but I am much more prone now to say, this is a personal question. It's none of my business. You don't have to go here, but I was wondering.
Yeah, yeah.
And then they answer. They go, yeah, that's
Right.
fine. I can go there. They're just waiting for the opportunity to bloom.
For sure. And I think too, the presentation of the question in and of itself, right? Giving them the option to right off the bat, you don't have to answer this, but I'm inquisitive, and then stepping into it, right?
Right. Yeah.
I think that's where a lot of men get tripped up as well is they don't know how to formulate a question with a caveat.
And but again, part of it is that it's really all about them anyway.
Mhm.
It's like, well, enough about me. Now you talk about me.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, that's always been something that, again, too, from my perspective, it's been something that I've never fully been able to step into,
What do you mean?
talking about myself.
You've been
Even,
fine. You've been fine today.
well, even with starting this podcast, right? I mean, there's a component of where that you have to do so. You have to talk about yourself. You have to, yeah, you have to show some form of a mirroring uh, effect in the conversation with the
Right.
guest.
Yeah.
Um, but I don't try to toot my own horn. I really have no desire to do it. I've done quite a few things that you could, put up on a list of highlight stuff, and I just don't really care.
Good for you.
So it's uncomfortable for me to get around another male who has that type of energy.
Which kind of energy?
The energy of I need to talk about myself.
Oh, right.
I need to tell my tales. I need to tell my accolades because I can look at it from the perspective of, all right, where does that rate on the scale of the high priority thing or something that's really not even affecting the needle?
And it's not, and I think the reason is you've said it earlier. It's not registering on your empathy scale.
Correct. Correct. Very much so. Very much so. With dabbling in Lark's life story, you've got some accolades. So from that perspective, that says something about the way that you're presenting her. Have you found in these conversations that people have respected the fact that you're talking about a female character as a male writer?
Yeah, I haven't gotten the blowback that I expected that I'd get.
Okay.
And there was one woman who uh, reviewed Troubled Water, which is my third book. And she said in her review, as soon as I found out it was a guy writing as a woman, I couldn't wait to take this book apart. And she said, after page 5, I forgot it was a guy. And and
Nice.
that has been a consistent reaction that I get. I know I can't please everybody, and I know I probably miss it's a little tone deaf in places, but that's
Sure.
the beauty of having beta readers who are young women,
Yeah.
and I've gotten some great feedback from women who have been consistent beta readers over the years who say, yeah, no, don't do that,
Right.
and so they protect me from myself. But it's been very gratifying and a relief to get that kind of affirmation that I'm getting it.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. From that perspective as well, you mentioned that you learn that females are most often in a defensive mindset continuously. Did that allow you to step into the suspense thriller component a little bit easier, or what was the decision to go in that direction?
No, there's not really a conscious connection there. What made me
Okay.
go into that is that I just wanted to get a book published. I had no idea about genre or anything like that. I
Okay.
just wanted to get published. And I think the first book went through 14 major revisions, and about the 10th draft, I was starting to get some interest in agents and publishers, but the rejections were more than just, yeah, good luck. There was one publisher in particular who said, it's not really literary, it's not a mystery, it's not a romance. I don't know what it is, therefore I don't know how to market it. Good luck with your writing. And
Hmm.
so I went to a book club that met in our neighborhood in Atlanta, and 25 women read the manuscript and then let me sit in on their critique. So not only were these women who were taking it apart as a guy writing as a woman. But one of the real actionable things I got out of that experience was that as I was listening, I realized that I had three subplots that I didn't need. And
Okay.
so in the rewrite, I took those out, and the manuscript went from a 150,000 word mishmash to a 75,000 word mystery suspense novel. I didn't even
Oh,
know what my genre was until I finally got rid of all that excess stuff and
yeah.
realized, oh, so this is what it is. And it had nothing to do with Lark being a woman and me being a guy.
Okay. Fascinating. Fascinating. Another.
I did learn something though about being a woman in that dynamic, because there was a line where Lark says, "I'll jump in the shower and I'll be right there." And they go, "We do not jump in the shower. We savor the moment, dude."
Oh, wow. Yeah. Guys definitely jump in the shower.
You jump in the shower, get on with it, man.
Exactly.
Same with shopping. Go get it, move on.
For
I
sure.
hate to go shopping with my wife because she's looking at this and we don't need this, but she's looking at that. Just do it.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Based off of all of this information that you've gathered through the processes and also the career, how and when did you decide you're going to start being a coach for others who are writing?
That happened gradually too. These are things that just sort of gradually come to the surface. I was still working at CNN. I believe I'm trying to think if it was at the time that I'd gotten published. It might be. I went to a writers conference,
Okay.
and someone said, because I was published. Now I was, a
Right,
bit
right.
not I wasn't a big deal, but I was farther along. And so
Yeah,
this guy said, "Here's my 150,000 word tome. Give it a quick read and tell me what you think." With me, there's no such thing as a quick read, and it needs work isn't really going to be that helpful. So I
yeah.
decided to monetize it. And simultaneously, while I was at CNN, word got around that I was a writer. Of course, I was an editor at the same time. And so someone hired me. I think I charged her like 50 cents a page or something to
Right,
edit her memoir. And so I was already an editor, but I was not an editor of this kind of long form stuff. So I didn't charge much because I didn't know if I was any good. And so that was the beginning of coaching in terms of, doing fiction and that kind of stuff. But I was always sort of a coach among my colleagues at CNN. When I moved from Atlanta to Washington, David Borman, the bureau chief at the time, wanted me to mentor people in the bureau to help them write for broadcast. And so
okay.
I would hold classes, every week or something like that of, usually new hires, interns who would take the class, and I would basically help them learn how to take the wire service story, which is written newspaper style, and craft that into, a much more succinct, written for the ear broadcast story. And so
Right,
that became sort of a mentoring kind of thing. And then, relationships bubble up from that kind of thing too. So
right.
it's gradually gone on to the point where I hate to use the word sophisticated, but it's a little more involved.
Structure. Okay.
Structured, good
Yeah,
word, yeah.
gotcha. It, I think this is another highlight moment because what I'm seeing here, and this is one of the things that I try to highlight with any time I have a guest that transitions from one career scenario to another. It's because it's very valuable for creatives to be able to look and think in this fashion. What they have as a skill set in one industry that they may be in can be utilized in another. And it seems like it has become a very natural pivot for you to step into that.
Yep.
And I think that's something that the audience should take note of because you were able to recognize that and just move it right into what you are currently doing.
As if the recognition comes in a flash.
Right,
It's
right.
very gradual.
For sure. For sure. But that's the beauty of a lot of times a pivot that becomes the thing that is more in tune with your heart space
Right.
versus what you've done as a job for most of your life.
Well, and I like the fact that you use the word pivot because that's actually a device in writing fiction because plot twists are pivots. It's
Yeah.
pivoting the story in a new and unexpected direction. And it's
Yeah.
not much different than the way we live life, cause and effect, trial and
Yeah.
error. You know, something happens and our life pivots in a new and unexpected direction. In
Yeah.
fact, the working title of my memoir was Pivot Points. I've changed it to Plot Twists,
Okay.
a memoir on writing and living, which is going to probably be coming out later this year because I've identified those pivotal moments that brought me
Nice.
to where I am.
Yeah. Yeah. The thing that I think of most easily when I talk about a pivot, because I played sports, was back when I played basketball. The pivot was a key move for a center or a forward down low in the paint. If you could pivot and score, that was a characteristic that you built off of. Uh, And I've just continued to utilize that because I know in my own career, if I've got to a place in the road where it seems like what I'm doing is just starting to peter out in terms of its energy and flow and opportunity. I've always looked for, all right, what's the next thing that I can step into?
Yeah.
Taking all this information of what I already know, plus what I just experienced,
Yep.
move it over here and come in from a different angle so that I can be beneficial because of the change in perspective and the
Right.
different angle of perspective that I had for it.
And it's an accumulation of these things.
Yes, correct, correct. And again, I'm seeing that across your whole storyline. The opportunity to be able to get up on stage and do the 15-minute one-man act scenario, then take that, you're in the DJ booth spinning records. Next thing you know,
I'm getting PTSD here.
you're in Germany interviewing Alfred Hitchcock. Just the changes and shifts that transition throughout your storyline they're fascinating for me. And I can only imagine it's just going to be expounded upon in the memoir.
I mean, we're covering a lot of the same ground. You're asking all those important questions, and I all the questions that I wrestled with and continue to wrestle with to one degree or another.
Yeah.
And I find it. I've been retired since 2013. I cannot imagine what it would be like to be retired, and all I would do is go play golf, or God, shoot me now. I mean,
Yeah.
it's just I'm living as if I've got another 25 years. No guarantees, but I'm taking the long view. And fortunately, I've still got my mind, my health. So I'm very blessed.
Yeah. And I think, again, another highlight moment, folks, that mindset of retiring when you have a creative vein within your body, I don't think it's possible to consider that. I know for myself, when I hear somebody talking about they're retiring or they're going to quit doing what they've been doing forever, it never crosses my mind that that's an option. Like
Right.
I'm an artist. I'm going to always be creating until I cross into the next realm.
Based on the conversations that you've been having, do you believe everyone has creativity?
I believe that they do if they're willing to tap into it.
How does
Because
one do that?
sometimes it's through conversation. Sometimes it's, and again, this is something that I've been able to look at, and it's been a skill set that I've had since I had my first job, which was working in a fast food restaurant. After 2 years of working in that environment, they moved me into a management position. Once you get into that type of position, I was constantly looking at what people's skill sets were, where their comfort level was.
Wow.
Go ahead.
No, I'm listening.
Yeah.
I'm fascinated by this.
And with that, I was always wanting to make sure they were in a position, whether it was at the drive-through, whether it was the front register, whether it was at the back in the grill, whether it was even in the very back, just doing prep work, whether it was doing dishes, even understanding and knowing where they felt most comfortable throughout the shift allowed things to operate more smoothly, because I didn't try to force them into doing something that I knew it was going to be a discomfort for them.
How would you handle it though if if the need was somebody had to be on the register, but no one was really comfortable doing that? Don't you then by necessity have to take someone and put them out of their comfort zone?
You do in certain instances. A lot of times I would even take that on myself. I would step up there and take over that order.
Because you've done all the jobs anyway, right?
Correct. At that point, I have to know everything.
Right.
So I always felt it was easier for me to just step over and step back versus saying, "Hey, I need you to come out here, do this."
Because it wasn't a power thing for you.
Correct. No, not at all. Had nothing to do with that.
Did this experience spill over into future things that you did?
Absolutely.
Because we're talking creativity.
Yeah. I've always looked at everything as I know what I can do and how much capacity that I have to do it. And I know which things I want to delegate out versus wasting my time and my energy trying to do it along with everything else. So I've learned to delegate. That's been something that has not a lot of people have the ability to allow that to take place. Delegation. A lot of times they either want to control it, do it all themselves, or they just want to tell everybody versus, figuring out, is it going to be worth it to put that person or make that person do it? Or am I going to have to spend extra time covering after it's gone in the wrong direction? The other aspect of that is it has allowed me to think of every creative opportunity, if I have to pull in other resources, is how I can create that team of individuals to help me accomplish this thing that I need to accomplish. And again, I think that plays into a little bit of the empathy as well. Having that understanding of somebody else's comfort level, comfort zones, being willing to not be the complete star of everything that's going on as an artist. Because a lot of times we get into that place where we have to be the star. And for somebody who really doesn't want to be the star, that's hard to navigate as well. So just different things like that. I've learned that, yes, it plays out across the whole process. And with that too, that allows me to have the perspective to be able to have a conversation like this. And if I'm talking to somebody who doesn't see the other opportunities that they may have or could have if they were to shift, or if the conversation's going in a direction of they like what they're doing, but it's draining them, then I just start asking those questions. Well, what are the things that you really like doing?
You should be a psychologist.
I probably could go in that direction. I just don't want to spend the money or take the time to read all the books.
Right.
I could tell you a lot of where this is coming from has been the years spent in therapy, being on the other side of it. I do know that. But being able to show somebody that, hey, you could be doing this other thing over here that might be something that really lights up your life. And I think that's the opportunity of people being able to tap into their creativity.
I have a personal question that you don't have to answer if you don't want.
No, by all means.
Because in my experience, and I don't know if this is true for you, but it my impression is, I don't have any data to back it up, that guys are primarily reticent to do any kind of therapy.
Very much so.
And what then made you willing to do it, and how are you different now having done it?
Number one is I was my own advocate, which is key.
What do you mean in that context?
It's probably one of the most essential things that you can do if you're having issues where you need to reach out to somebody else for help.
Okay.
You have to be your own advocate in the sense that if the first try doesn't work, you have to be willing to look somewhere else for another opportunity to be able to connect with somebody. I was very fortunate early on to find a psychiatrist who was female, who I worked with for over 25 years until she retired. And when she did retire, it was like a shock, right? Because this is the person I've opened
She knows everything.
Exactly. So that's one thing, is being your own advocate. Also, talking with somebody who you become comfortable with and you build a rapport. And it's not going to happen in the first session. Not
Right.
going to happen in the second session. You're going to have to do it a few times to get there.
Yeah.
The other thing too is she was very open to allowing me to look outside of what I was working on with her. So if I would come in and explain I was having an issue or a problem or something that I wasn't fully comprehending or understanding within myself, she would offer me the opportunity to work with another colleague, somebody that was working in a different modality. Hey, go try this. Go talk to this person. See if it works. See if we tap into something. Come back, let me know, because I don't do what they do. So it's going to be educational for me. So she allowed for that to take place. And I think that's key as well, is to be able to find somebody who's willing to listen to you, but also allow you to explore other things if it's not in their wheelhouse.
I see.
And all of the male figures that I worked with over the years have not done anything for me. If anything, they've been more like the instructor that I had in college who said I was only going to be a B student. And to give you an example of that, for a period of time, I went to the University of Michigan's Depression Center. I was a patient there. After about 6, 7, 8 weeks-ish, I was asked to go in and talk to the head of the department. And he sat me down and said, hey, we've worked with you for this amount of time, and this is going to be your last day because we're not going to be able to help you. Now, in my head, I'm like, wait a second. This is one of the top universities in the country. This is one of the top research universities in the country. And if you're telling me as the head of the department, you can't help me, then what does that mean for me? Right? So in my mind, I had to make a decision. Am I going to let this stop me? Am I going to just end everything right here and now? Or am I going to...
When you say end anything, were you talking suicide?
Yes. That plus anything else. Ending, meaning that was the final solution.
Yeah.
But everything other than that would be, okay, am I just going to stop going to therapy at this point? I'm going to stop trying to figure out if, what are the core issues? What is the reason that I'm feeling like this continuously? And all of these things did come about after a suicide attempt. So I had that as an option in my head
Yeah.
all along. Realizing through the course of my journey that I am able to connect easier with a female therapist or doctor, and knowing that it's probably not going to work out if I try to go and talk to a male physician or therapist or healer or any of these things, because I have ventured into energy healing work as well, non-traditional type healing. Just that realization that I know what works for me and I'm going to stay in it this way. And that way I can still be open. I can have the questions answered that need to be answered. And if they can't be answered, they have the willingness to allow me to find out somewhere else.
Okay.
Those are all key things that have to come into play. And it's not a one thing is going to be the fix for everybody. Same thing with medications. If you end up having to be on medications, that's a process in and of itself. And again, for the audience, don't get discouraged if one does not work, because everybody's different. It's not one size fits all kind of a scenario.
What I'm taking away from what you're saying is that if you're a guy who feels, I don't know, out of sorts, out of step, and feel that you need help, there is a way to do that that is right for you.
Yes.
And what was right for you was, you say, be your own advocate. In other words, knowing what you need something.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then it's just a matter of being assertive enough to find the right fit
Yeah.
for what you need.
Yeah.
And
Perfect
it,
summation.
okay, thanks.
Yeah. Exactly. You hit it on the head. That was a perfect summation.
Okay.
With that, I would like to have us circle back to this grief component that you mentioned earlier
Sure.
on, and how writing potentially is something that can help with that process of going through grief. And what,
And when we say grief, it doesn't need to be the loss of a loved one. It can
correct.
be the loss of a pet, a relationship, your health, your innocence.
Yeah.
And in my case, it was, again, it's a process. And I mean, I experienced I witnessed a car train collision that killed 3 people when I was 9 years old. And one of the people killed was my age. And so that was traumatic. And I look back now to, I've got, my books have been in print for 20 years. The first grief experience was 60 years ago, something like that, 65 years ago, maybe. And I look back, and the writing that have done was not a conscious attempt to work through my grief,
Okay.
but it's been a process of actually having done that, because my first novel takes that car train collision and puts it into story form.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
Another part of the very first chapter of the first book, Fast Track, is my sister's suicide in 1980. I was on the
Mm,
scene. I was on the scene that day, and so those two events, separated by 20 years, came together to form the beginning of the novel. My protagonist, Lark Chadwick, has grief and loss in her psyche, and
okay.
that carries through to all 6 books. By the time I was writing my third book, Troubled Water, my youngest son went missing. 22 years old, went off the grid, out of character for him. He was found dead in my car of an accidental heroin overdose a block
Oh,
and a half from our house in DC. And so that began then. I went through grief counseling. And when I ultimately did write about it 2 years later, it became the subplot of Bullet in the Chamber, my fourth novel.
Okay.
And I look back and I can see, oh, I was working through grief the whole time.
Right.
It's only been recently that I've been much more mindful that this is something that I've experienced, that I know in a sense how to navigate, and that writing has been a catharsis. Writing has been therapeutic. And so
Right.
then what I have built into a lot of the writing classes that I teach is mining the pain, because that's stories. Those are stories, and we all have them. And that's what makes interesting stories.
Yeah.
Because as we work through them, there's a certain degree of authenticity and vulnerability. And so when we put those experiences in the life of the characters we create, we're working it through in a way that others can relate to. They live vicariously through our characters. And so that's been something that I've been learning about it as I've been doing it over the last, most of my life.
Thank you for sharing that, John. I had no idea that was going to come out the way it did, but it so much plays into the platform. It so much plays into the mindset conversation and also plays into how creativity can be a way of helping through mental struggles,
Boy,
difficult heart struggles.
absolutely. And the thing that I've discovered, look, I'm a left brain guy. I mean, I'm analytical. I want to figure it out. And the healing, I think, comes from an entirely deeper place.
Yes.
And it's been inadvertent, but it's been real. And that's the spooky, wonderful thing about healing, that it can happen if we are willing to face things
Yes.
and go through it. Our society tries to anesthetize the pain. And
Yeah.
I think good writing means you know yourself. The better you know yourself, the better your writing is going to be, and the more willing you are to face the pain, the more authentic your writing will be, and it'll resonate as real to other people.
Yeah. And I think that's the key thing is that resonation. When you start resonating with others and individuals, the connection becomes deeper. The connection becomes pivotal, potentially in allowing someone to move into a place of healing or at least starting a journey to healing.
Yeah.
And I think those are the conversations that are always worth having.
Yeah.
I think that's a fantastic place for us to be able to end here today, John. Thank you so much for coming on, sharing.
You said it was going to be a deep dive, and man, you were right. Is anybody listening? Is anybody out there?
Yes, yes, they are. They are, for sure. One of the things I always want to end the episode with is just a kind reminder for the audience to always listen to your heart, as John has through his story and through his career, but also to be kind to your mind.
I like that. Thank you.
Um, um, um,